Hey guys, it's Makeshift. Today I'm going to show you how to make 3D eyelashes for your plushies. I have a finished side here so you can see what it's going to look like. This character has very long eyelashes, so I thought it would look nice to do a 3D effect rather than to have a flat embroidered eyelash down here. You can see it's going to pop out really nicely from the side and just look really nice. So I have my other side here that's ready for its eyelash. And for the fabric you want to use to make the eyelash, a few recommendations. One is that you want it to have somewhat of a weight to it so that it doesn't just kind of flop all over. So if you use something like a knit, that's not really going to work because knits are really thin and flimsy. So this is a suede. The other thing is that you don't want it to fray. So when you cut it, you want it to have a nice clean line. So this fabric isn't going to have little pieces of fabric coming out from it, because that just won't look good. The other thing is that you want your fabric to be double-sided, because if you view the plush from the back, you're going to be able to see the back of the eyelash. Obviously this fabric is not double-sided, so what I did was take some heat and bond and fuse 2 layers of fabric together. So you can't pick it apart. It's nice and fused together. It also gives it more stability, which is really nice because it is a little bit floppy, which isn't ideal, but once you heat and bond it together, it is nice and solid. So we have our other half of our face here, and to prep this, one thing I would recommend is having a template here. So I printed out my design of my eye from my embroidery program. If you don't have a printer, you can just draw this yourself, but I printed it out so that it would be exact and then drew on how I want the eyelash to look. One thing I use this for was to make sure that the piece of suede that I cut is big enough. You don't want to cut it too small because then you might end up accidentally cutting off a piece of the eyelash and either having uneven eyelashes or having to start over. And when you go to trim the eyelash in, if you have a template, then you're going to make sure that it's even with your other eyelash. So for your embroidery design, I've got it embroidered up to the point to where I want to attach the eyelash. You can kind of see here that I've got a basting stitch already done right here in black, and this is just a line up stitch to where I can see where I need to lay my fabric, and then we're going to do one more basting stitch to attach the fabric, and then we're going to finish it off with a satin stitch just like this. So I'm ready to move over to my embroidery machine now, and let's go. Alright, so I've got my hoop right here. I don't have it locked in yet just because it's kind of awkward to do this underneath the foot, but I've got my suede here and I've also got my template. So what I'm going to do is lay my template down here on the eye, and I'm going to take my suede and slip it under here, and I want to be close to the edge here where it's going to catch, but not too far out, just because I'm going to be trimming this underneath the satin stitching, and if you go too far past, you might not be able to get a nice clean cut. And same with the bottom here, you don't want to go too far out. Obviously I've got lots of wiggle room here with my suede where I'm not going to risk cutting it too short. So this placement looks good. I'm going to double check that my basting stitch is covered up by the suede, which it is. So now I'm going to hook it in awkwardly. And still the placement looks good, which you always want to double check. And put the foot down. Pull the thread out just a little bit. Let's start. Alright, So now we've got this basted down here, and I'm going to take this off and trim right up to the edge of the basting stitch. Alright, I'm going to go ahead and trim off the excess fabric here that is beneath the basting stitch, just because your satin stitch is wider than your basting stitch. So if you trim after the satin stitch, you might not get all the extra fabric that just peeks over the edge. So you want to trim just the corners, not the actual eyelash itself, but you just want to trim the corners before you do the final satin stitch. So it's kind of an awkward angle, but it's a little bit delicate work, so I need to kind of have this close to my body. So hope you guys like my Appa and Momo pajama pants. So here we go. Just gonna snip off this extra thread here, and I recommend getting just a pair of curved embroidery scissors if you don't have them. Got these on Amazon, they're awesome. So I'm just going to lift this fabric and from the side with my not dominant hand and get as close as I can with the curved embroidery scissors to the basting stitch, but you don't want to cut the stitch because then it's going to come apart. But you want to get as close as you can, because if you don't, then you're going to have extra fabric sticking out from the satin stitch. So I'm just going to trim. Just start small and cut more if you need to. If you pull on the fabric as you cut, it'll help get close. Sorry if you hear my cat meowing, she's hungry. So I did my first cut here, and I've still got a bit of extra. It's hard to see, so I'm just going to keep cutting. And if you push towards the basting stitch as you cut, it'll help you get close to the stitches. Pretty good for that side. See if I can get you a closer view here. So it's pretty close to the basting stitch. There's not too much extra going on here, so the satin stitch should catch all this fabric as it stitches, so you don't see any extra. I'm going to trim a little bit towards the top here, just because my basting stitch stops. You can see how I can push this up. It stops about here, but my fabric is a little out from there, and I don't want the satin stitching to be the one catching it, but I need to be careful because this eyelash starts pretty soon after the basting stitch, so I'm only going to take a little bit off from the side here. Okay, just trim that corner. Alright, so we're all trimmed up now, and I'm going to go ahead and stick it back under my embroidery machine to do a final satin stitch that's going to run all the way up here. It's going to catch the fabric here to stick it to the fabric, and you don't need to put any water-soluble stabilizer over the top of the suede. It doesn't really have any sink to it, so unlike minky or fleece, it's not going to sink too far into the fabric. You can see I've already got some on the minky, but I don't need to add any extra here. It's already on this side, but don't need any here. So I'm going to hook this up again and finish it off. Okay, got my hoop locked in here. I'm just going to double check one more time that my placement's okay. Always remember to double check before committing. And everything still looks good. Everything's lined up. My fabric is trimmed nice and tight to the basting stitch. I'm going to go ahead and kick off this final embroidery. Here we go. Okay, here we have our fabric pulled out of the embroidery hoop. I've cleaned up all the jump stitches from the embroidery, and you can see here how the satin stitching has encompassed all the fabric. We don't have any extra sticking out beyond the satin stitch. It is nice and clean thanks to all the trimming we did, which is exactly what we want. So now we can use our template to trace the eyelash shape onto the fabric and cut it out. So I've got my template here, just going to lay it onto the eye again. I'm going to make sure that the placement is correct, and I just have a fabric pencil here. You don't want to use anything permanent. This can just rub off, or just use a little bit of water. Having black eyelashes is a bit challenging because I know a lot of people use Sharpies, but you can't use anything permanent. So I've just got this little pencil, which doesn't show up much, but good enough to be able to cut around your outline. Okay, so we got it, and there goes my pencil. So I've got it all traced now. I can kind of see it. It's light, but that's almost by design because you don't want any of this pencil to be left over after you cut out the shape. As one last check, I'm just gonna quickly compare it to my other eyelash, and looks about even. You can see how this ends right about at the bottom of the eye, and my placement is just about there as well. So I'm going to go ahead and cut. So some tips for cutting: you want to do generally long cuts. You don't want to have tiny little cuts because then your eyelashes can look jagged, and that would not be a good look. Make sure you're using good sharp scissors. So I'm just going to cut along my outline slowly but with purpose, and nice even cuts. Make sure you don't cut your fabric underneath. Okay. First cut looks pretty good. Looks pretty nice and even right along my outline. So I'm going to keep going. I'm going to go for the bottom now. Just making sure I'm not catching any fabric underneath, because that would be really bad. Okay, this edge is a little jagged and a little coming off of the bottom of the eye, so I'm just going to clean it up a little bit. Alright, so then I just have the middle indent, and if your outline gets too hard to see, you can always just retrace it again, but I can still see what's going on here. Another note is that you don't want to make your eyebrows too thin. If you make these really thin here, you run the risk of it just being able to rip off of the satin stitching. But this character has nice big eyelashes anyway, so no risk there. And for this last cut, just double make sure you're not cutting the bottom eyelash as well. And always cut larger than you really need to. You can cut things down, but you can't make them bigger again. Alright, so we've got our shape here. Let's see how it looks. So I got some fuzz at the end here. And there we go. Let's compare it to the other eyelash. Alright. So I'm seeing top one looks pretty good. Looks like this bottom one can be trimmed a little bit more. Looks like this one's a bit thinner than this one, and you're going to get little differences like that even though you have a template. So I'm just going to clean up this bottom one a little bit more. Just put this right here so I can compare as I cut. But I'm just going to take off this little bit. Alright, let's do one more eval. It's looking pretty good. Cuts look even, not really any jagged going on. Alright, I'm thinking this looks pretty good, so we'll call that our wrap. You can see our finished product here, and she looks very silly not being sewn together here. Kind of a funny smug look we got here, but alright, I think this looks great. So hope you guys learned something today, and if you guys use this technique, I'd love to see what you make with it. And if you guys have any other ideas, tutorials you'd like to see, just let me know. Thanks guys, bye bye.